It is episode 102. I am Michael Askins, architect and technologist, and this is the Technology Architecture Solution Engineering Show. In the virtual studio, we have
Dev.
Yes, thank you. So we are back to getting into a regular cadence, and we are going to try to keep them a little bit shorter. A little bit of feedback. We need to have that treadmill episode or that commute home episode. So we're going to try to box in a couple. We might even have some early releases, and we're also going to point you to some other material for some other efforts that we do elsewhere. But before we kick it off, we want to thank you as listeners. If this makes it to video, we thank you as viewers. We also like to thank Aspirant, the sponsor that helps make this show possible. So we appreciate all of you, including Aspirant. Visit Aspirant at www.aspirant.com to find out more. So let's just dive right into it. Dev, how you been, man?
Doing good. It's good. It's nice to be back in the saddle since our end of year 100th episode.
Yep.
So that's obviously a big milestone for us, and I'm excited to jump into it.
Back in the saddle. So, we had a little bit of a impromptu, I should say pregame. Well, the pregame, I shouldn't say pregame because we're coming off the big game. I can't say the actual thing because we'll get copyright struck. But anyways, the pre-show, I sent you something inside of Teams on our extracurricular Teams channel. You ready to talk to some of that stuff?
Yeah. I feel like it's been a while since we did anything related to modern workplace, at least in this kind of format. So yeah, I'm excited to jump into it
in this capacity. So there was a couple things that stood out to me. I'm just going to immediately just to cut to it. Let's toss it over to you and say, well, what was the standout? Well, first of all, we're going to give you the source of material. So Tech Communities, I'm going to do a little plug and promotion for Tech Communities. It's a great place to go. It's a Microsoft Tech Communities, techcommunities.microsoft.com. You have to register and you can get on there. You don't have to see everything, but if you interface and you want to ask questions or respond, you need to have an account. Free account, doesn't cost you anything, but it's a great place to get some resources, how-tos and whatnot. It adds to some of the credence of some of the things that are out there when it comes to researching and seeing what others are doing. In the past, we've had shows where I've harvested questions. Usually it's from stuff that comes direct to us or stuff that goes into the ITP or the IT Pro channel where people are like, how do I do this? Or what's the best way to do that? Occasionally, I'll just see what the top questions are, and Tech Communities one of them. With some of the changes and stuff in Modern Workplace that are out there, tossing it to you, this a nice aggregation of some things that are out there for Modern Workplace. And I know there's things in that wheelhouse that are important, and you have a great mind to call those out. So go for it, man.
Yeah, so this was the SharePoint roadmap pit stop for January, which is they do this every month. The tech community people, along with Microsoft, and kind of give an aggregate. It's almost like what's new in Teams, and for that month. So more SharePoint focused, obviously. But yeah, there's a whole host of different stuff that they call out, or the stuff that's coming out that's being rolled out to wide release across all the different tenants and all that good stuff. I think the first thing I'd like to call out is Mike, I know you're a big fan. I forget what the solution was that we had deployed. It was something in the marketplace, so apologies to whoever created it. But Microsoft List has a board view now, which is I think is very interesting, just because I think Microsoft has provided 10 different ways for you to do the same thing, which is good. Some people like projects, some people like planners, some people like both, or lists and things like that. But to the board view for Microsoft List seems pretty interesting, and List has become it's kind of its own thing over the past year or so. As far as the redesign of it, the different if you want to call the rebranding of it, outside of SharePoint as its own little microservice. But I just want to know if you had a chance to take a look at the board view. I know you're big on boards. I know we had, like I said, touched on I think a list solution. I think maybe it was a Power App based on Power Apps, if I remember correctly.
It was a list and Power App solution that I wanted to explore. We had to load it as I had to pull it from a GitHub repo, and we had to be that special Uber credentials to be able to upload it, and it does aggregate some things really nicely for that. So I'm excited to see this native in the platform. And again, like you had mentioned, Microsoft gives multiple ways to do multiple things. The value of boards are, not just sorting and grouping. It's just there's something fundamental about having things separated in logical ways as the way our brains are wired. In fact, on IT Pro channel, we had a show. This was probably before we rebooted. That had some of the mindset on how we think of. And the guest I had on there was speaking to organization in our lives and how people have gone from writing lists to having apps with grouped lists to now all of a sudden we have this board mentality. So I'm excited to see it. Any way we can deliver content that makes it easily consumable by anyone, I'm all for doing it in multiple lanes. Whatever works best for you, go, right?
Yeah. No, definitely. I agree, and I think that's kind of what Microsoft realized. And I think that even goes into some of the, I won't say discourse, but some of the confusion around Loop versus Teams. I think providing different ways for people to consume things. Everyone's brain doesn't work the same way. So some people might like the Teams view, some people might to use Loop, a little bit more freeform, if you want to call it that. So yeah, I'm curious, and I think depending on how you create the board view, obviously it's just like any other view in SharePoint, whether it be you have your different filtering views and based off and filtered off of this column or whatever, however you design it. When you move stuff back and forth, it'll automatically update the list value item, which is pretty cool. That the board is based off of. So I'm excited to play with it and see what it's about. So yeah.
So I have two questions in that lane before you go on to your next component. So number one, this is probably a real quick one. What is your take on the lists application that is available for the machine? I don't know if you poked at it much. So it's for those who aren't familiar, who may be on the business side, there's an application you can install from the Microsoft Store that has the ability to take the lists as a discrete microservice and surface that as a native Windows 10 or 11 now app. I tried to create, or I shouldn't say I tried to, because I successfully did it. I created some lists directly from there. I've gone in them. This is going to spur it. Well, number one, I know you've had that. So what's your opinion on it? But then the second point is are we creating too many ways to do the same thing and creating confusion? And what do you think the approach to that is?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the first question for the list app on people's computers, I touched on it a while ago. I mean, to be quite frank, there hasn't been a need for me to use it, just because there's you can access everything via the browser, things like that. If I was traveling more, maybe, and I needed to offline some stuff, I'd probably maybe look at the list app, just because that was a big thing they touted early on was offline viewing and uploading those changes once you're done with what you're doing, or once you're connected back to the internet. So yeah, I mean, it's fine. I mean, I'm still miffed that they released an iOS app for lists and not Android first. I mean, it's just very interesting. I know Android's coming.
It's about American footprint.
Yeah, I know Android is coming.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fine. I mean, it gets the job done. I mean, I'm sure as if you notice, it's not like anything special. But I mean, it's probably similar. It's similar to the the browser view and certain things like that. So
it is. Yeah. But there's a value to it. But when I say, are we going to interface with the data? Do we want our people interface or our computing population? Let's be a little more correct at that. Do we want them interfacing with the data using a lists app or even lists in the web version, or do we want them to have an interface with checks and balances, something like a Power App that's going to front that? Because you have a little more check and balance there. I mean, you have list level controls and security. It's not like if you're doing that, that's a big no-no. You're breaking a best practice. I think use case will determine that, and your types of people using it will help determine that. But I just think there's a lot of ways to do the same thing across multiple products. Yeah. But then there's also a lot of ways to do the same thing across the same product. And I understand the concept of we want to. I just said this not too long ago. or in the show. We want people to be able to do what's comfortable for them, but also we also have to, as IT professionals, we have to support that, right?
Yeah.
So if you're a business listener, sometimes choosing a path makes your support model a little more simplistic if you don't have the resources to handle all those, or your friendly neighborhood consulting company aspirant to help you with making that happen, right? So
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said is there are too many ways to do the same thing. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head that there is 10 different ways to get there, but there's nuances to each of those ways and controls around each of those ways that may make sense for one situation but not the other.
yep.
Like with Power Apps with List, if you want some of that more control and more of a guided experience, I guess if you want to call it that, Power Apps might be the best thing for you if you want to overlay that over top of a list, right?
Or if you want to put additional functionality like
Yeah.
a reader or a barcode reader, or
Yeah.
you don't have to key out, like you want to take a picture of something as opposed to taking pictures and then browsing and attaching it. So I mean, there are benefits of having a Power App natively,
Yeah.
just as it is, but just a simple standard list, like you said,
Yeah, I think it's all about use case, governance, requirement, standards. I mean, there's just a whole host of, that's why some people might get overwhelmed by it, and I think that's definitely the con to it. You could get overwhelmed. Okay, well, where do I start?
Yep.
And I think that's a lot of things, especially even when I came into the industry, the number of years ago, where do you start? As far as learning things and exposing yourself to different things. So I think that's definitely like you say, talk to your friendly neighborhood consultant or someone who's been in the space and just say, okay, where should I start? Where do I begin? Because I think
okay
that's good.
to not know, right? Even if you're an IT pro and
Yeah.
say maybe there's choices you just haven't explored yet. It's okay to say, you know what, guide me to the right way.
Yeah, exactly. So
I do have a question for you.
Yes.
So if you had like something in SharePoint and you're a really poor speller and your grammar is just atrocious, what do you do?
It's a great segue, Mike.
I'm a master of segue, right?
Yeah, and this is actually something I've seen that's kind of been released already, or I've been working with it at least because I've been doing a lot of SharePoint page work recently. Is the Microsoft Editor service is available natively on SharePoint pages now and news posts. So obviously, what used to be spelling and grammar in Word turned into Microsoft Editor. Used to be just available in the Office apps. Now it's available natively as a service in SharePoint. So if you misspell something, grammar's wrong, anything like that, sure, they'll call you out for it. So I
little squiggles, just like you do in Word.
exactly, the red little squiggle or blue. Yeah, so I've had a couple of missteps and I've seen it and I was like, oh, that's new, because usually when I see that in the past, it's because the browser is picking it up. Or something like that, and then you have to figure out how to replace it or whatever.
Do you know what the all-time worst thing you can do when you are heavy in a SharePoint world and with this new feature is have Grammarly running and at the same time, and it's just like, because it's browser based, right? And Grammarly is gonna do its Grammarly thing, and then it's gonna do its speech and grammar thing, and who's winning and why did you pick one and you picked something totally different and which one's right. But it is really good, to your point. I actually, when I saw this, I actually went into one of our test sites that we have, and I started just goobering around, and it's pretty awesome. So it's definitely good. It's good. It's good to have. These are the kind of things that are not like, woo, look at this. I'm sending off the here's a cake. You did it. You have arrived. These are things that are logical things that should be in there. But it's also worth noting that these are some of the things that are historically reasons why people shifted away from SharePoint as a CMS or some sort of other way, because they know that people are putting stuff in there. So you have people writing content in Word, they get the word corrections and they're copying and pasting it into SharePoint. But we always know the formatting, it doesn't always line up the right way. And it's just ends that form and function part and adds, other function to it, I guess. I don't know. What else did you want to touch on from that article?
Yeah, another thing that's really kind of cool that they're releasing, and I think it's like one of those things where it's not going to blow the socks off anybody, but it's just one of those things that natively feels they can make sense. Is now that now that when you search in either SharePoint or Office.com or Bing for Work, for example, your Teams conversations will surface in those search results, whereas before you had to actually search in Teams to find those conversations. Um, so I think that's really awesome because I know I think we were talking about something today, and I went back and started searching for it in Teams, trying to find where it was said. Um, wasn't very successful in doing so, or at least maybe I imagined it. But yeah, I think having that search ability, I think Microsoft's been really building on the search pieces. Search from anywhere to get and aggregate all those results, and I think this was like one of those missing components. And it's like conversations vertical inside the search results now, and it includes Teams, conversations, and Outlook.
Nice.
So I think that's pretty awesome. Is when you're trying to find stuff people said, or you're not sure if it was in an email or a Word document or something like that. I think it's pretty cool.
It's worth also saying, speaking of, well, I think we should probably have just the show, maybe it's not for this forum, maybe it's for a Pro Talk forum about Microsoft Search, because I added the Microsoft Search add-on to both Chrome and Edge. And I find it invaluable, in finding information out about coworkers or searching projects and what have you. And it's all secure and isolated and bucketed. If you don't have that on, talk to your friendly neighborhood. I know what to do with this person in the ramifications of that, because sometimes you want things to be searchable and other things not so much. Like you don't want to have your, HR salary increase for the year, something that's searchable. Anybody can go into, Bing it, if you will. So that's just the kind of stuff that are small little value adds that make such a huge impact. And if you were to take the time people would spend looking for stuff, I bet you if you add it up, it's a tangible number. And if we can shorten the time in which people find out, frustrated beating their heads against the granite wall, trying to find a document or a conversation or something to try to just get to the root of what they need to find, I bet you it's a tangible number. In fact, I just put a note down here to try to see if there was ever a study around that. One other thing on search I want to throw out there, this is my unabashed plug for Delve. I know during the day job, we had some conversations around, things in searching for skills and stuff. And Delve isn't your HR database. It's not an HRIS, but it is a nice place to put things in about you. Some of the stuff in there kind of intertwines with Viva, which it should be another conversation that we need to have another Pro Talk on. A lot of if you fill out your profile and your Delve and you get all that information in there, when you search in SharePoint, that little people on top there, you click there. Like if you put it, like if you have a skill, like you're talking about SharePoint and you put that as a skill, and if you just search SharePoint inside the search at the the root of your SharePoint org, you'll get results back. But if you hit people, if they have that as a skill, they'll list the people that have that skill. It's very useful, especially if you have if you don't have a robust HRIS system with complete competency tracking and all the other stuff. It's a great little tool to do that, but it's also a way to connect with other people on things that are not related to tech. Because what are your interests? What are your hobbies? And if you're in an organization, you put in woodworking, you can find all the woodworkers and say, hey, let's form a woodworking group and we can go, whittle owls at lunchtime or whatever it is you want to do, So it's also worth noting, I'm just going to throw a little technical thing out because we're talking conceptual, is up to 72 hours for all of that to be crawled and put into the search results. That's a little bit of time, right?
Yeah.
So don't expect instant gratification. If you're thinking, "Ooh, I'm going to go update my Delve and see if I show up," you're not going to. It's got to crawl through all the different services and index them, and then pump them into SharePoint search.
Yep. So as I said, Microsoft has invested a lot into it to make it more one experience across the whole board, and be able to aggregate all that data across that thing. I think this is one of the bigger steps that they needed to take. And I'm excited to see where it goes. And And speaking on, obviously, the one last thing on search is that I've exclusively started using Bing for like the past year. I very rarely use Google anymore. I started when I it kind of happened when I started using the new version of Edge. Um, that I just that Bing is the native search engine. And I don't find myself needing to like I don't have any issues with finding what I need to find. So it's curious. I also always get them rebate points.
So,
um,
so I'm a big fan of Microsoft. I'm a big, promoter and evangelist, and I use Chrome or Google, I should say, more than I should. Um, I use Edge, like depending on what I'm doing, right? Like especially if I'm doing like a quick image search or something like that. The way that Google curates them to me makes more sense. I mean, Edge is very similar, but when you're on the fly and you need to get a GIF out there like really fast, I just find Chrome much more useful when it comes to that. But when it comes to business searching or doing searches for things that are Microsoft and like looking for stuff at Docs or LearnDot, um, I find Bing to be more like from a technology perspective to be more pointed towards what we do obviously. But I think that, yeah, let's just move on. I think myself into a bigger hole.
um, I know we're running. I got two more things I wanted to touch upon here, and I think the first one is actually pretty interesting. The native SharePoint migration tool that Microsoft has that's free as part of the Office 365 service is introducing something called workflow migrations from SharePoint on premises. I think the focus is on 2010 to Power Automate. Um, yeah, it's very interesting. Because I know there was a number of different this would have been extremely clutch for a particular project I was on a while ago, because they had hundreds of workflows, and it was going to be difficult for them to move in time for with the deadlines they have, and we were kind of scratching our heads on how to make it happen without just sheer manpower willing it into the environment. But yeah, it's part of it. It's in public preview. It's for SharePoint on-premises customers to migrate 2010 workflows directly to Power Automate. And
Nice.
this is achievable via the user interface and the tenant, or through via PowerShell. And I believe that from what we see, obviously it's still public preview, so things are still we're working themselves out.
Sure.
I think the focus is on two out of the box 2010 workflows with the approval and collect feedback SharePoint designer workflows. I'm sure there's still a decent amount of people out there on SharePoint, on premises,
Oh,
have
there
those
is.
different types of workflows. So I'm curious to see. We don't have any of those customers in the hopper right now, but and I'm not going to stand up a 2010 farm to test this out.
Why not?
Boy, if the bits are out there, I mean, that's.
I can get them if you want them.
But I'm curious to see how this plays out, because obviously that's usually one of the biggest barriers when we talk about getting someone completely off of SharePoint on premises to SharePoint Online. Is there's some of the obviously there's other tools out there to migrate the content, sites, lists, and libraries, and all that good stuff, but the workflows are something that's manually. Usually you have to bring it over. So this is an interesting step forward to see how this works, and how many times it gets it right out of 10. I'm curious to see how much the validation will be needed to make it work. So I'm curious to see.
Well, the question I have for you, though, and I know we're running short on time here, but how often do the native migration tools work to begin with, let alone having to get a third-party tool in?
It's a very good point.
What's your last one, man?
It is, as I say, this is part of the native SharePoint migration manager tool, or stuff like that. It's serviceable. When there's and they have and to be fair, they've made a lot of updates over the past few years. Sure. They bought Mover. They bought they've realized how much it wasn't. There was a lot left to be desired with it, and they've made improvements to it. So yeah, I'm curious to see how it goes. on that front. The last thing I wanted to touch on is I think we're kind of circling back to lists, but with your Microsoft personal account now, you can use Microsoft Lists,
I
which I
know.
think is really interesting, really cool, because I think this is like really outside of the Office suite. This is really the first time that Microsoft has made, well, besides Teams, made a Teams and Skype, made this type of service available.
Well,
Um,
let's be fair. They didn't make Skype available. They purchased Skype and it was already
oh,
available to them. So,
fair point. They made Teams available, we'll say.
there's also LinkedIn, which is a Microsoft
Yeah,
property, which they have a non-paid version of it, which I think the majority of most people use. Right.
yeah.
This is a more personalized, useful tool as opposed to something that you're using to interface with others or what have you. That was kind of shocking to me that that's the case. Why do you think that approach was made? Is it just to just expand the ecosystem for the general public, or to be more competitive in the marketplace by saying, hey, if you're that free Zoom user, you be a free Teams user on your personal account, and here's some value add? Or what do you think the motivation behind that is?
So I think this goes back to Microsoft. I'm not saying this is the whole reason why, but I definitely think this is a huge part of it. Microsoft trying to
This is
penetrate.
opinion, by the way. This is not
Yeah,
fact. So
yeah,
listen,
yeah.
this
Fact.
is
Yeah, yeah,
opinion.
yeah. Pure opinion. Microsoft has not paid me to say this at all. But at least in my mind, I think this goes back to Microsoft consistently trying to penetrate the consumer market, whereas Google really has a stranglehold, and you're self-admitting that you use Google's products for your personal day-to-day life and managing certain things outside of outside of work. And I
I
think
do. Thanks for bringing that up.
and Google has a bunch of these different microservices they use. Google Notes, Google. I think they have one like list-ish. I think with tasks or to-dos or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
I
They
forget what
got
it's
the
called.
Canva board. They got like tons of stuff,
Yeah.
right?
So I mean, Microsoft is a little bit behind that when it comes to what's available when you sign up for a free Microsoft account. Obviously you have the Outlook email, the Outlook Live email. You have the free Office apps that you can leverage on the web, things like that. So I think this goes back to the whole trying to push out Teams for personal. That whole mindset as far as we want to try to penetrate that market as much as possible and show the usefulness of
Yeah.
that. And I think that's probably a big reason why they want to do this.
So I think we have to remember why Google gives away so much of its stuff, right? Because they are not, or I should say, again, I'm not speaking for Google. This is opinion, uh, steeped in real world empirical evidence, but still opinion.
Yeah.
That's our, hey, CYA. But let's just say Google is in the business of selling advertisements. That was their model, right?
Yeah.
Search and search placement, and ads, right? They're in the business of that. And so they had all this extra, hey, let's do this cool thing. And Google got beat up over years for saying, oh, here's this thing, and then let's yank it away from you. Or here's this other thing, and it's successful, but let's jam it into something else and call it something else. So like they want to get that business market where it's like the opposite of Microsoft. Like they got the consumer market. They're trying to get the business market
Yeah.
with GCP and,
Exactly.
the Google Enterprise, the platform for messaging and what have you. Whereas Microsoft's already got that sewn up, and they're going the opposite direction.
Yep.
And not that either way is good or bad. It's just the positioning of the companies, right? And maybe that's something for a little more of a deep dive on the organizations. But I think that the biggest challenge that Microsoft has with giving some of this away is sustainability, because you used to buy an operating system, you used to buy like all this other things, right? Now you're buying subscriptions. So how that shakes out, it's shaked out really well for Microsoft. Everyone is still on top of the tech stack when it comes to large companies. So it's worth noting that it doesn't take much to scale something back and offer it to the public. as
Yeah.
long as it's not like we're going to give you half of it, like a half the power, as long as it's still useful and good. And I don't think that they would, go halfway, but I'm just saying, some organizations have done that in the past, right? There's been a lot of organizations that said, oh, here's a free version. It's basically freemium, right? It's free, but if you really want to do anything useful, you're going to have to pay. That's not Microsoft's approach. Microsoft's approach is, here's technology, use it. If you
Exactly.
really need something more than this, by all means, you can get something else. But here's a fully functional thing, and I take the hat off because it also democratizes it. It puts some technology in the hands of those who can't afford a $55 a month subscription at an E3 or E5 or whatever for having that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting in the description when they say what it can be like the Microsoft account preview, and it's actually limited to the first 200,000 people who log in and start using it.
Yep.
So it's the first come first serve basis, but they use a lot. They mention like employee onboarding as one of the uses for this free app. So obviously there's that consumer market, but there's also probably that focus on that smaller than a mom and pop shop type deal, where like you said, maybe those businesses can't afford to have an enterprise subscription or the bare minimum, and just using the free products that are out there and putting it in their hands as well. So I think that's definitely another use case out there for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I see that we both are wearing Under Armour gear, not a sponsor, but do you know who is? Aspirant. Aspirant, again, thank you for helping making this show possible. Thank you for, providing some of your expertise for some of our shows. So hats off to the team over there. I know some of the peers we have over there are pretty sharp and smart technologists. So, as we mentioned at the end of the year in our episode 101, we look to circulate some more of that expertise out to you. And we again thank you as listeners. Before, this is the way I normally do. Let's put the thank yous out there and toss it to you for one last thing. Anything else you got?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. Godspeed.
Very good. Very good. So if you're on the treadmill or you're on the commute, hopefully we didn't make you sit in the driveway waiting to finish this show, and you got your 8 miles in or whatever it is you're striving for. We appreciate you, and we'll see you on the next go around. Goodbye.